And now to the influx of children crossing the border into the U.S. and the influx it has created in our courts. The Justice Department is now creating a fast-track system to help cope with the crisis. Each minor is being promised a court date within 3 weeks of being placed on the docket. The problem is, courts around the country were already facing over 28,000 pending juvenile cases before the new system was announced. There are over 600 cases in Orlando and over 1,800 right here in Miami alone. Again, this was before the influx of new cases. Joining me now is Florida immigration attorney Lida Rodriguez-Tasef and BuzzFeed's Washington bureau chief John Stanton. To both of you, thanks so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Jose.
Now, Lida, how do you deal with this fast-track situation? Because what the White House is saying is what they're doing is fast-tracking the legal system so that everyone gets representation and their cases are heard.
This is a problem because you can fast-track a case all you want, but these kids don't have representation.
What do you mean they don't have representation? Of course they do.
Absolutely do not. We are scrambling, for example, in Miami-Dade and all of Florida to try to get volunteer lawyers to handle these cases, but volunteer lawyers are not experts in this area. So we're doing the best that we can because we've been threatened. 120 cases will be heard a day. That makes absolutely no sense, and therefore, basically what's happening is these kids are being railroaded. There's no process going on, and they're not having an opportunity to have their cases investigated and vetted and prepared.
John, you also reported on the new video technology being put into place to deal with the system that doesn't always work, but what's the impact of that been?
Well, they're using it in places like Artesia, New Mexico, and other sort of far-out parts of the country where they're housing mothers and some of these kids. And the problem with it is that the video doesn't work. The judge can't really look at them very well or see some of the kids or asylum applicants in any kind of detail. And what they have to do in this process is make a credibility determination. And if you can't see them, a lot of attorneys are concerned, frankly, that it's going to make it difficult. And the kids also have a lot of trouble talking to these cameras. They're being asked to talk about very traumatic experiences they may have had in their home countries or during a trip to the United States. And, it's a very impersonal and cold atmosphere. And especially if they don't have an attorney, it makes it very, very difficult for them to get a sort of a real chance at asylum.
Lida, the White House will tell you that had the Republicans gotten their act together and in the House passed a budget for these kinds of things, it could be a lot easier to get a whole lot more attorneys involved and pay them. But it seems like Congress just doesn't do their job. And so everybody's stuck on momentum of things that were happening before when we need additional funds and resources.
That is absolutely correct. There's a funding problem to get the lawyers that are needed in order to process these cases. So clearly that's an issue, but you don't solve that problem by fast-tracking a bunch of cases for kids that are not being represented. And
What's the solution? To keep them there hanging for weeks, months, or even years?
No, absolutely not. The solution is to find the funding. And you know what? They either do it voluntarily or they're going to have to do it through the legal process, because a lawsuit has been filed in Seattle by the ACLU in order to cause the government to fund these necessary lawyers. This is a due process issue. These kids have every right to be represented, because otherwise we're sending them to their deaths with a lawyer. That makes absolutely no sense, Jose.
John, how much do you think is political and how much do you think this is really? I mean, the fact is, if Congress doesn't budget for these issues, you just can't make money out of thin air.
That is true, but I do think that the White House is trying to have it sort of both ways, right? I mean, they've declared the children and mothers to be a threat to national security. When they go in to argue against asylum cases, they have sped up the process. They keep them in these areas that are very hard to get to, so that there aren't very many attorneys in places like Artesia that could even begin to work on these cases. And so I think they're trying to have it a little bit of both ways. So.
John Stanton and Lida Rodriguez-Tasef, to both of you, thanks so much for being with us this morning.
Jose.
Appreciate it. And coming up, our